Greetings from Taipei. It's such an honor to start off this double session of the Asian German Studies panel, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations to come. For mine, since I can share copious visuals with you given the medium, I've chosen to omit explication as well as parts of the argument, but I'd be happy to discuss details of the written paper or share the article, which is forthcoming this year in Oxford German Studies. A burnt orange glow darkens to the periphery. Two bodies strain forward to meet in a kiss. An eroticized figure pours tea, and another woman leans out enviously towards the lovers. The opulent colors and ornamentation, exotic characters and landscapes, as well as astonishing journeys and magic, may resemble other European adaptations of Arabian Nights fairy tales. Yet, remarkable technical and political innovations distinguish the oldest, extant at least, animated feature film, Lotte Reiniger's 1926 hand-cut Scherenschnitte shadow animation film, Die Abenteuer des Prinzen Ahmed. Reiniger's signature technique of Scherenschnitte, scissor cuts, combines traditional German craft and storytelling style with animation techniques she invented, arising from a legacy of puppetry arts extending far beyond Germany. Reiniger acknowledged a debt of inspiration to Asian puppetry and silhouette traditions, writing that most shadow puppetry derives from China, where it was a widespread art since, quote, "the Chinese are uncommonly clever with their hands." Reiniger details the origin of shadow plays in China, India, Java, the Middle East, and Greece with evident respect and earnest care, admiringly describing the mechanics and settings of the plays, as well as the coloring, perforation, and materials of the puppets. She rhapsodizes about Javanese shadow puppetry, comparing an exhibition she saw in the Victoria and Albert Museum, where, incidentally, she was the first exhibition of a non-British artist, to her images of a traditional dalang play with gamelan accompaniment in Java. Reiniger is a fascinating figure, a noteworthy innovator and inventor, not to mention technically skilled animator and gifted storyteller, and her biography is remarkable, particularly around the Third Reich. Like other German artists of the time, Reiniger had a volatile relationship with the Reich, variously supported or labeled a degenerate avant-garde artist. Her work can be read as feminist and even queer. Technically, her elevation of the feminine folk art of Scherenschnitte to an arguably high art cinematic form, and narratively, naturalizing female sexual autonomy and same-sex love. Then there are strong socialist elements in her biography and art. She lived and worked in the midst of German socialism. Her husband was a party member, as were many of their friends in the art world, and she cites political reasons for her decision to emigrate once the Nazis were in power. Die Abenteuer premiered at the Berlin Volksbühne, known in the 1920s for its experimental productions, and for many decades thereafter as a leftist cultural site. And the couple's friend Bertolt Brecht was a primary promoter of the premiere. Then, narratively, there are strong anti-capitalist messages. Given the duration of this presentation, I won't be going into it, but the themes of greed pervade and are a strong element of showing the motives that she then critiques. So from one perspective, which is dominant in the literature on the film, it's quite progressive. In addition to the technical innovations of the film, including her Tricktisch, which she refused on principle to patent, so Disney claimed the patent for himself. In addition to these innovations, Reiniger's narrative boasts social innovations. She portrays overt female and homosexual desire and critiques greed. However, from another perspective, it is a blatantly Orientalist retelling of a fairy tale recognizable as Eastern from the stories, symbols, landscape, and plot. It resembles previous interpretations of the Arabian Nights tales in German film. You will recognize the tropes, and even the characters. The film follows the adventures of Prince Ahmed, which starts when he mounts a flying horse an evil magician created to trick the prince's father, the Caliph, into selling Princess Dinarsad. Just look at this Orientalist imagery. Ahmed figures out how to control the horse in time to land on the island of Wakwak, where he meets the compelling Paribanu, whom he kidnaps and takes to China. where we really start to see the heinously racist caricatures. The magician tracks them down and sells Paribanu to the Chinese king, whom Paribanu rebuffs, so the king offers the foreign beauty to his male lover. Meanwhile, the magician leaves Ahmed under a boulder on the mountain home of his enemy, the African sorceress, who chooses to turn her power to good and help Ahmed save Paribanu from the demons of Wak-Wak, who have taken her home to their island. En route to the rescue, Ahmed encounters Aladdin, who, through interactions with the magician, had pretended to be royal to marry Dinarsad, then lost everything. Ahmed and Aladdin bond while the African sorceress fights and slays the evil magician, reclaiming the lamp Ahmed needs to reach Paribanu. Returning home to the Caliph, Ahmed introduces Paribanu to his father, and Dinarsad reintroduces Aladdin, to whom she is devoted despite the truth of his impoverished origins. The overarching story may be familiar, but the presentation is not. As the first feature-length animation film, it is technologically groundbreaking. From the Scherenschnitte to the new animation tools and techniques Reiniger invented, the audience was watching something quite novel. Narratively, Reiniger includes radical portrayals of powerful female and homosexual desire. Paribanu is the film's central lover, rather than merely the love interest. Her desire is palpable from her first appearance, stepping into a pool with a belly dancer's posture, arms outstretched in a slight ripple, hip jutting and head turned to exaggerate her voluptuousness. Paribanu and her two Gespielinnen hold hands and touch one another sensuously. The audience sees Ahmed's lips part in desire as he watches from the undergrowth, as Paribanu splashes after her playmates, signaling the eroticism of their play. While exoticized Federkleids signal the Orientalist fantasy of the scene, Paribanu's agency and magical power complicate the traditional narratives of a passive and powerless Eastern subject, or woman waiting to be ravished or colonized. Ahmed violates that power by stealing her feather dress, so she cannot fly home, jumping towards her though her hands show resistance, chasing her along the water, and carrying her away on the magic horse when she appears unconscious. The titles clarify the crime of this last act by specifying that Paribanu had been abducted, aus dem Dämonenlande entführt. Yet Paribanu regains her autonomy by refusing to follow Ahmed until he shows remorse and returns the feather dress to her, at which point it's within her power to choose her path. Later, when the Chinese king tries to rape her, Paribanu successfully forestalls his advances. When Paribanu is reunited with Ahmed, she inexplicably takes the more sexually aggressive role. We see her repeatedly pursuing the prince for kisses. Reiniger rewrites the fairy tale not only with women's erotic agency through Paribanu, but also with female intellectual and supernatural power through the African sorceress, who is introduced with the adjective powerful, mächtig. The climactic scene features a twist, female empowerment and homosexual desire, since the prince is only able to rescue Paribanu with the sorceress's help and wits. The African sorceress is the film's most heroic character. Her power, timing, and sound judgment repeatedly save the day, from the climactic scene to details such as the sorceress rushing over with Aladdin's lamp to solder all the stumps when Ahmed attempts to fight a hydra by severing its multiplying heads. William Moritz interprets the African sorceress as reflecting the woman's liberation agenda of Reiniger's 1920s German socialist milieu, positing the sorceress as, quote, a traditional priestess of the old goddess religions, who affirms pure female power. Yet it is displaced on the exoticizing, if in this case not eroticizing, other of an African woman. There is also homoeroticism in the sorceress rescuing Paribanu. The sorceress plays the role of the prince in shining armor. In this latent form, homosexual romantic themes evade the censorship that cut another scene Reiniger animated for the film, in which the Chinese emperor kisses another man. Sorry I could not find that still. Reiniger was candid about wanting to integrate homosexual themes, which may have even been a driving motivation for this film. She may have chosen Prince Ahmed as source material for her film precisely to promote homosexual liberation. She had read Sir Richard Burton's essay on homosexual relationships in the prince's story. Motivated by a desire to defend gay and lesbian members of her social and professional circles, Reiniger was inspired to portray homosexuality in a more dignified, romantic way than contemporary German depictions of humiliation and pain. Portraying same-sex love as naturally as in the source stories, Reiniger hoped to forestall a negative reaction in her audience, writing, quote, "I suspect that when the emperor kisses Ping Pong, that must have been the first happy kiss between two men in the cinema, and I wanted it to happen quite calmly in the middle of Prince Ahmed, so children, some of whom would be homosexual and some would not, could see it as a natural occurrence and not be shocked nor ashamed." That scene, in which the emperor kisses his male lover Ping Pong, was cut from the film, omitted precisely because of the homosexuality. The issue is evidently important for Reiniger, for the short film she made directly after Die Abenteuer, called Der scheintote Chinese, developed the relationship between the Chinese king and his lover Ping Pong. While the Ping Pong character is ludicrous, the other characters are honest and honorable. The censored scene of the emperor kissing another man would have reduced Orientalist emasculation of Eastern men, while the female desire of Paribanu and occult power of the African sorceress contribute to the otherness. Reiniger's nuanced and transgressive narrative is possible through the Foucauldian heterotopia, a slightly uncanny world inviting viewers to critique their own worlds. The film's uncanny, exoticized world at the expense of the Eastern subject. Reiniger reinscribes the suggestion of smoke, misty landscapes, faded shots, geometric patterns, and intricate details, reverent symbols producing a culturally coded understanding of the Orient. However, the beauty with which she sought to imbue female sexual agency and homosexuality veils an ignorance, if not a dehumanizing otherness. Narrative action set near Aladdin's magical castle features Chinese mountains, and Paribanu's exquisitely cut embellishments, headdress, bangles, dramatic necklace, and bell at the peak of her forehead just under the veil, are ornaments more of Indian than Arab design. Later, her stylized costume of a Chinese bride next to a scimitar-wielding prince creates a semiotic cultural jumble. It is through the medium of such Orientalist narrative that the audience receives her message of feminist and gay empowerment, socialist political critique, and artistic innovation. Through this heterotopic world, Reiniger was able to present same-sex love as natural. Even in the censored version, the text introduces the king's male lover as a romantic partner, des Kaisers Liebling, and portrays them absent-mindedly holding hands, including the lover holding the king's hand while considering Paribanu as his bride. There is another homoerotic moment between two other men after Ahmed saves Aladdin from a demon. Here, Ahmed is prince in the African sorceress's shining armor, saving a faux prince. The Western fairy tale trope is thereby queered several times over, by the man's reliance on a more powerful woman, by Aladdin's class subversion, and because a man saves another man. After vanquishing the demon, the prince slowly reaches for the tailor's hand and pulls it to his breast, while drawing his face closer to Aladdin's. As they speak, Ahmed grasps Aladdin's hand in both of his, pulls the hand to his chest, and reaches with his other hand towards Aladdin's face. After a title break for dialogue, we see the two men both on their knees leaning together. They fumble slightly, then holding hands, each with a hand on the other's torso, Aladdin tilting his head slightly up to Ahmed. They each move their faces closer to one another. Aladdin hesitates and looks down. Ahmed moves closer, in either speech or for a kiss, only to be interrupted by an explosion. The African sorceress arrives, reminding Ahmed that he should be rescuing Paribanu. The reminders of the two female love interests, Dinarsad and Paribanu, make the homoeroticism less threatening, because the audience expects the fairy tale ending of realized heterosexual romance. Similarly, the violence of the battle scene provides cover for homoeroticism. Ahmed and Aladdin comfort and touch one another while watching the sorceress fight the magician. Aladdin even at one point appears to jump into Ahmed's arms. Yet an Orientalist view of Arab men as effeminately weak distracts conservative viewers from the homoeroticism. Once again, Reiniger advances a progressive agenda of homosexual equality at the expense of Orientalism. You'll have noticed from the stills the colors Reiniger uses, though some of the stills I found online are not true to the recently reissued version. The colors are a quality that many writing on the film have celebrated, but which I view as particularly powerful in forming the Orientalism. Though she portrays race primarily through stylized symbols, Reiniger's technical skill allows her to evoke Oriental symbols and imagery more emotively with color, drawing from cultural associations of color to depict the subjects. The film's backgrounds are culturally linked, with a yellowish pear for China, and reddish cinnabar for Africa, as represented by the African sorceress's mountain, while a malachite green background to the battle scene between magician and sorceress conveys supernatural power. The European Orientalist imagination seems to associate certain colors with the Orient and the other. Perhaps such invocations of color by one culture to describe another are not meaningful. Yet it is important to recognize the visual appeal of an Orient animated in colors so luxuriously enchanting. Colors, costumes, architecture, stylized fonts, and foreign names all signal an Orientalist aesthetic within the first minute of Die Abenteuer. The highlight of the opening act, the ruler's birthday in the Caliph's city, features elephants, acrobats, an ornate castle with a multitude of minarets, and opulent pageantry, all reinforcing the Middle Eastern setting. The palanquin curtains concealing the beautiful princess and the Caliph's promise, beim Bate des Propheten, all evoke Islam, though it is important to remember that 1920s German views of Islam were not as Islamophobic as in the West today. The Orientalist aesthetic is particularly acute at the start of Act 3, introducing the king and his lover. The text changes to a proto-wonton font. The king rocks back and forth with a straight wispy beard and half-moon eyes, holding his hand in mudras. The lover disjointedly plays bells between two foo dogs, his hair in a rat tail, and the architecture features exaggerated artichoke leaf roofs and shoji screens. To contemporary sensibilities, the visual cues constitute obscene stereotypes and mixed semiotics. The heterotopic scene, combined with the imaginative possibilities of the experimental silhouette animation form, permit the filmmaker to rewrite a common story with a social critique. This critical potential, however, comes at the expense of an offensively Orientalist portrayal, rife with East Asian, African, and Middle Eastern stereotypes. I believe the technical feats and Orientalist tropes at once veil the progressive messaging and permit the audience to imagine a different world. But what do you think?